The stream is live. Okay, we got to get right.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Where's Rashi? Hello, everybody. Welcome. Come on in. Hi. Hi, everybody. Come on in. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us. Come on in. Share your name, your pronouns if you use them, your role, organization, and why you chose to be here today. Yes. Hi. Hello, everybody. Come on in, join us. Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Come on in, everybody. Hello. Come on in, y'all. So excited for you to be here. Come on in, everybody. All right. Well, welcome, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. But before we do, I want to thank you all so much for joining us in today's conversation. This conversation is going to be unique, and we're going to talk about something that quite often is not talked about. We're going to break the silence. But before we do, I want to introduce you to me, if you've not met me, and our panelist. I am Dr. Nicole Noel Evans, and I serve as a Senior Director of Leadership at Embracing Equity. I'm honored to be here with you all in this powerful hour of learning, reflection, and connection. And so, here's what we know. We know that mental health is deeply personal. And yet, this conversation is going to revolve around how, for many in the Asian American community, again, it's cloaked in that silence. And so there's cultural stigmas, family expectations, the model minority myth, and intergenerational trauma that all play a role in shaping how mental health well being is understood, experienced, and supported or not, right? How it's often misunderstood and not supported. So I am so grateful joining me today. I'm is Dr. Caroline Lee, who brings both professional expertise and lived understanding to this conversation. And she's going to guide us through some key insights from her clinical work with a special focus on dismantling stigma, unpacking harmful myths, and understanding that complex intergenerational dynamics that also really impacts mental health. Also joining today's conversation is Rashi Jawade, a passionate advocate for justice and healing. And together, these two powerful women will tell us, will help us explore the challenges and also the strengths within the Asian American community when it comes to mental health and well being. As we begin, we encourage you all, as our listeners, to listen deeply, reflect openly, and consider how we can collectively create spaces that honor and uplift mental health for all. We are going to reserve some time at the end, so feel free to add your questions in the chat throughout the session. So let me give a deeper introduction of these powerhouses that are on this call with us today. Dr. Caroline Lee is a licensed clinical psychologist specializing in child, adolescent, and adult mental health. Dr. Lee is based in California. She has over 2 decades of experience working with youth and families. Dr. Lee earned her PhD in educational psychology from Stanford University, where she also taught psychoeducational courses on culture and coping. She holds a master in education, master's degree from Teachers College, Columbia University. She's also a credentialed elementary school teacher and used to teach my favorite, kindergarten and first grade. Dr. Lee also is a second generation Taiwanese American and a child of immigrants. Active in the community, Dr. Lee serves on the Community Advisory Committee for the Asian American Foundation's National Study of AANHPI, Youth Mental Health. She regularly gives psychoeducation presentations and collaborates with local school districts to provide resiliency workshops for parents and teens. We're going to say it again at the end, but you can find Dr. Lee on Instagram at Dr. Caroline Lee. That's where you'll find her for insights on diverse Asian American experiencing and parenting strategies. Also, going in a little bit deeper, Rashi Jawade. Rashi is the CEO of Embracing Equity. She is an accomplished leader in education DEI with most almost 2 decades of experience dismantling systemic inequities in schools and empowering educators, administrators, and most importantly, leaders with the tools to build more inclusive and just learning environments. Prior to joining Embracing Equity, Rashi was the vice president of strategy for the Branch Alliance of Educator Diversity, where she worked with minority serving high education institutions such as HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, and tribal colleges. She helped them to diversify the teaching workforce. She started her career in education as an attorney at Baltimore City Public Schools. Rashi's background as an attorney, combined with her lived experiences as a first generation Indian American with Marathi roots, has given her unique insights into the intersection of culture, policy, and education. Whew, that was a lot to read about these phenomenal women. But we're going to dive into some questions and really having this a deep conversation.
Thanks for the introduction. I'm so excited to be here talking about my favorite topic. And before we start, I wanted to just share a couple statistics with you all. So, suicide was actually the leading cause of death for AAPI youth, 15 to 24, between 2018 and 2022, according to CDC data. And it's actually doubled in the past 2 decades. Youth suicide in this community. Also, recently, there was a study in California of high schoolers, and they found that 33.9% reported depression and 16.9% reported suicidal ideation. And just this past month, the Asian American Foundation, they lead a study on American perceptions of the ANHPI community. And they've just released that actually 40% of Americans believe that Asian Americans are more loyal to their countries of origin than the United States, and that only 44% strongly agree that the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II was wrong. Right. So there's a lot going on right now. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity for us to talk more about, I don't want to be alarmist, but I think these statistics aren't really commonly known. So I appreciate the opportunity to be able to kind of delve a little bit deeper into what this means.
Wow, Dr. Lee, those kind of hit me when you said those, right? You said it out loud, and that's certainly, I have to admit, not even the perception that I have, right? And so let's talk about, if certainly if it's a misconception for me, it's probably for other people as well. And so the question that it begs for me is, what are some of the most common misperceptions about the mental health in Asian American communities and about Asian Americans overall. Maybe, since Dr. Lee started us off with these statistics, Rashi, can you help start us off by helping us think of the big picture, and then Dr. Lee chime in? Rashi?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And thank you, Dr. Lee, for sharing those statistics. Thank you, Dr. Evans, for the introduction. Some of those stats, I guess, shocking, but perhaps not that surprising, especially given I feel like I live in Austin, Texas, and that's where I'm dialing in from. And I feel like that what I feel like is a really common misconception. There's a few different common misconceptions, right? So we're often as Asians really perceived or expected to be submissive, to be docile, to be mild mannered, and that in and of itself can impact your mental health, right? Like having to feel like you have to be this, not taking up space, quiet, and especially as an Asian woman, I feel like that is especially true, that we are definitely expected to be, don't take up space, be the skinniest you can be the quietest you can be, have the smallest shoe size you can have, like all of these things, right? They're all, and they're expectations that are frankly outside the Asian community, but some of them are also expectations from within the Asian community, right? And so I have ADHD, officially diagnosed. I'm neurodivergent. And Asian folks are also neurodivergent. Like, hello, we exist, right? Yes. And not all of us, are amazing at math or want to be doctors or whatever the case may be, and or are amazing at standardized tests. And so in a lot of ways, like the model minority myth, which, frankly, like some even Asians, even South Asians within my community have embraced, is not really, is a misconception that is not really serving us, right? Like it doesn't help us to paint all Asians. Well, first of all, Asians as a community are so diverse. It's not a monolith, right?
Yes.
And by looking at it even as one big swath, we're like, we're minimizing, I think, some of the differentiated supports that different Asians need. I mean, I know we do a lot of work with the Hmong community in California, right? Very different needs than, like, I know, for example, as an Indian American growing up in Maryland, what kind of needs we had. So I think there's a lot of misconceptions. I think, first of all, by even treating all of Asian Americans with one broad stroke, we're probably doing ourselves a disservice. And then on top of it, I think by perpetuating, these kinds of misconceptions, frankly, right? Like every community, Asian Americans included in that community, are all very diverse people. We're all different. And by kind of, I think, not by minimizing, I think, each person's humanity and what we bring, we're not actually in the long run serving anybody. And I'm really grateful also to have the opportunity to be able to share my perspective as an Asian American on this podcast, especially during this month, and specifically around mental health, which has been, frankly, like a journey for me too. And I'm 41 years old, and I feel like I'm still in the very early stages of my mental health journey, and just, understanding what that means. And so I'm grateful to be talking about it, not as somebody that is, been there, done that, but as somebody that is very much in the trenches now.
Right. I love that. Yeah. Dr. Lee, what about you? Join us. What are you thinking?
I think Rashi, Rashi brought up so many important points that I also want to just echo. Kind of, it's really important to think about the Asian American community not as a monolith, and there's over 50 ethnic subgroups. I think a lot of people just kind of think of, maybe Chinese, Japanese, Korean, South Asian, but then there's so many subgroups that have different needs. The refugee population, you mentioned the Hmong community. And if we don't see the diversity, and we just focus on the model minority myth that everyone's doing great. Certainly there are people that are doing well, but it's kind of like a bimodal distribution, right? A lot of people are doing well. There's a lot of people that need support and services. So if you only think that people, everyone's doing well, then why would we need services, right? Why would you need to seek And I think it's important for the educators that are listening to our administrators to be aware of that. A lot of times for the Asian American community, from what I see, the grades are actually the last to go, right? So actually they might be suffering, they might be having panic attacks, they might be depressed, but because of certain expectations from home or their own personal expectations, that isn't something you're going to see outright where you're like, oh, the grades are dropping, so there must be something else going on. So you kind of have to look for cues. There's a lot of invisible suicidal ideation in the community, right? It's not, kind of normalized to talk about it. So I think this is something that teachers, administrators need to be more conscientious of. How can it show up in different ways? And a lot of times in our community, there's a lot of somatization, which means there's a lot of physical complaints that come up before we have the language to say, hey, I've been feeling really sad or down. It might show up as constant stomach aches, constant headaches, or, kind of like, fast heartbeat. So I think actually that's something to really keep in mind, that those physical symptoms, it feels safer, right, to say I have a stomach ache, headache, than to say, hey, I think I might be feeling depressed or having panic symptoms. And going back to the model minority myth, I think it's important to also highlight just kind of how it also pits BIPOC communities against each other, right? To be able to say, hey, look at the Asians, they're doing it, right? They're doing it. And like, why isn't everyone else doing it, right? And when it's not really the case, So I think that's something that we really need to highlight in terms of making sure that people are aware of how that plays into the dynamics in our culture. Sorry, you were about to say something, Doctor.
No. I was just saying that the thing that you said that really resonated with me, that I really hadn't given a whole lot of thought to, the grades are the last to go.
Yeah.
That's something that will really resonate.
Well, I feel like I am proof of that. Like the first time I got anything other than an A was as a junior in college.
Wow.
Yeah. Anything other than an A was as a junior in college, right? So my grades were definitely the last things to go, right? And I mean, I'm adopted. I moved across continents. I moved from India to the US at the age of 12 as an adoptee, 8th grade, some of the worst times, right? Yeah. I moved away from home for college. I managed to get a scholarship so I could live on campus. So I was on my own, hustling, working 3 jobs, all of this. And meanwhile, now I mean, thank you so much, Dr. Lee, for even sharing how mental health can manifest as GI symptoms and other issues, because that was me all my life, where I'm oh, it's just a weak stomach, right? And now, actually, as an adult in my 30s, being in therapy made me realize, made me understand that, some of those things that I was ascribing to just that's just going to bother my tummy, were very much stress, depression symptoms. And I feel like I was definitely telling myself everything under the sun, except that I needed mental health. Right? So I was okay, I need to eat better. I need to eat more salads. I need to eat more fiber. I need to do this. I need to exercise more. So it's all these other things that were frankly exacerbating my symptoms.
Yes.
Right. And making it worse, but not even realizing, your vagus nerve, of course, affects your gut health and all of that. So yeah, that really resonated when you shared that your grades are the last to go.
Yeah, even in one of the universities I went to, there was a Chinese American student that turned in his final and then went to jump off a bridge. So that just highlights kind of the extent. Obviously, that's a very extreme example, but I think there's a lot behind that, right, to think about. And I think also I was bringing up earlier kind of just what there's been an increase, right, in anti-Asian hate, especially since the elections, and really to think about, you can't think about belonging without also thinking about mental health, or you can't think about mental health without thinking about how belonging, you're not feeling like you belong, right? Because our students, our youth have to feel safe in order to learn, right? But if you feel like you don't belong and you feel like there isn't space for you, or you're excluded, then how do you learn, right? And I think that's something also to consider, what these we have to think about that.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
this is why, like, at Embracing Equity, we say, like, effective teaching and learning centers inclusion and belonging and culturally, sustaining pedagogy. Like, that has to be at the center. It's not like, 9 to 5 is effective teaching and learning, and then like at 5 p.m. we're gonna care about the cultural background and the home life.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
It has to be integral. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and honestly, like, when I was working in Baltimore, the way this manifested was tardyism. Kids just don't show up. Right? They just don't go to class.
Yeah.
Like, they just don't come to school if they can, or if they have to come to school, they just don't show up to class, or they show up to class real late, or like, this is a real challenge, right? And so it doesn't help anybody for us to pretend that students feeling a sense of belonging isn't integral for them to learn. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Awesome, y'all. I know, when I'm thinking about your conversation, a lot of this is really resonating with me in terms of the Black culture, right? I'm like, oh yes, and in the Black culture, but I want to talk about that just a little bit. How do cultural values like collectivism, filial piety, or academic achievement, how does that impact mental health experiences and care-seeking behaviors? And Rashi, can you explain to folks who might not know what filial piety, I may not even be pronouncing it correctly, is, and how it is manifested for you?
Yeah. I'm happy to talk about this. So in the Indian community, like, your family is like number one, sacrosanct. And I feel like that, especially in like the Indian American community as immigrants, where I grew up in Maryland, we had a large enough Indian American community to feel like we had a community, but small enough to definitely still feel like we were the other, right?
Yes.
And so, especially in I feel like in cultural environments like that, in immigrant households, like, this is not a new concept, but like, your family becomes like sacrosanct, and you're like really trying to like make all decisions based in love and care for the family, and that's kind of how I grew up too. And like, I was born in India in a joint family, so it was like me, my parents, my grandparents, and my dad's 2 siblings, and I was the first kid in the house. Right. And they were like, oh, and and they were like college, they were like, going to college. So they were like educated, they were living in the city, right? Like, they were like, oh my God. So they heard all these like news and things about like the pacifier being bad, and like, like not encouraging your children to really use a pacifier, basically. Right. And so once I was off breast milk, literally my family was taking turns spoon feeding me milk. Okay? And if you come to any like, the Jawade parties, family parties, the story that Rashi was such a fussy baby that we were like on these shifts trying to feed her, and then inevitably our living room had this like navy blue carpet, like rug, and inevitably she was like the baby that would just throw up, to the point where we had to change this navy blue carpet in this living room because I threw up so much white milk on it. And it's like a funny story, and I love it. And it's like I was loved, I was cherished, right? But I was throwing up because I was being overfed. And what this has led to is that I still really struggle now with eating. And I have a lot of like eating related issues because I don't really understand when I'm full, and I struggle with a lot of things, right? But this piece around the feeding is very much like, I called it love in the time of colonization, because my grandmother herself, my parents themselves, like they've experienced poverty. My grandfather's village until like 2000 and something didn't have electricity.
Wow.
Right. So we're talking like you've lived such an impoverished life that now that you have it, you're like, drink up, like be a fat chubby baby, and it's rooted in love. Right. And so it has helped me understand that, like, I can, like, some of this behavior can be like amazing and fun family stories and rooted in love, and still could be the root cause of some of my eating disorders.
Both
right?
and
My eating
both
issues.
and.
And that doesn't mean I love my family any less. That doesn't mean I respect my family any less. And I can still get therapy, and I can still go to a mental health professional, and I can still unpack the two. And I don't have to just go home and say shit to my grandmother and be like, you fed me with the spoon. Why did you? You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't need to be like that. I can still love her. And I can also unpack my own trauma around it, right? And that is what I feel like has been helpful with having, I specifically see a woman of color therapist who is, actively into like decolonizing therapy, and how are we thinking about therapy, not just from a Western lens, but from a much more multicultural lens. And so this is part of the work, right?
Yeah.
Like firsthand.
Yeah.
So yes, that's my little filial piety story, where I felt really torn, because I was like, how can something so rooted in love have so much like trauma and adverse impact on me and my body in the long run, when the intent of it was like an overabundance of love?
Yes.
Right. And this is where intent versus impact, and therapy made me realize that like those are two different things, and their intent could be, my family still loves me, and all of this is love, and the impact of it can still be problematic, and that doesn't make the people problems. Right.
I love that. Yeah, I think, Rashi, I love how you're talking about how we can hold two things to be true at the same time, right? How things aren't all or none, that our parents, we can love them and appreciate all that they've done for us, but at the same time, acknowledge that the hurt, right, or the suffering that has come from that. And I see that being part of the struggle too for Asian Americans seeking mental health, because sometimes they feel like, oh, I'm, complaining about my family, I feel bad, or I feel guilty after all they've done, right? They've sacrificed to be here, to be in this country. Like, how can I complain? And to be able to say, hey, that it is okay to, as people bicultural identities, to struggle with that. And a lot of times that collectivistic culture, we say, when we're saying yes to, our family, are we simultaneously saying no to ourselves? Right. Yes. And I think that's the battle, kind of like, how can you kind of hold that space? Like, what do I want and what do I value? And if it doesn't exactly look like what my parents dreamed and hoped for me, is that okay? And can I have that? And, I think sometimes people struggle to kind of seek help because they feel like they don't want to shame their families. And so what ends up happening is I see a lot of greater severity at intake. These Asian American parents, they'll wait until things are really severe to the point of suicidal ideation. And some of these teens will come in saying, yeah, I feel like I've been depressed for 4 years, 5 years. I've had thoughts of suicide for years. Whereas, kind of a white family might come in being able to say, hey, my teen's been feeling depressed for maybe like a month. So I thought I should bring them in to talk to someone. And you can imagine which is easier to treat, right? When the symptoms are severe, or, for years and years, or, someone coming in when they're just starting to have the symptoms. And the research shows that Asian Americans are 3 times less likely than white counterparts to seek help. And that's why we're having this conversation, right? To really talk about, this underutilization of services. When we do seek help, it's hard to find culturally competent care as well, right? Culturally informed care. So there is a lot of struggle with that. There is a resource that we'll be linking later on with just a bunch of Asian American mental health resources that I've compiled. So hopefully that can be of use to some of the listeners here today.
So when we're talking about this, Rashi and Dr. Lee, how do we, because we're kind of a little bit moving towards treatment, but how do we even get there? How can we begin to dismantle the stigma around mental health in families and in community spaces such as schools, et cetera? How do we get there?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think there just needs to be a lot of, one aspect is psychoeducation, and for educators and people working with Asian American families to really be able to frame seeking help as a strength, right? You want your child to do well. How do we help them build resilience? How do you build resilience? They need skills, right? How do you get these skills, right? Connecting. It's not just you venting, but it's also skill building. How do you build coping skills? How do they, if they are having panic attacks, anxiety symptoms, trouble sleeping at night, we need them to feel safe and to know how to manage, right? We can't promise our children are always going to be happy. That's not realistic, but we can say, hey, here are tools to help you get through the hard times that inevitably we will all face, right? And I think that really is a key. How do you frame it in a way like, no, this doesn't mean your child is bad, wrong. And even to teens, when they come into my office, that broken. No, this is strength. It's strength to be able to say, hey, I need some support. And I tell the teens that you're in here, I'm here to support you. If there are things your parents are doing that are not helpful, I'm here to advocate for you, to be like, hey, when you comment this way or when you communicate this way, this is not getting the effect that, the outcome that you want. And I'm here to be an advocate for you as well. And for the parents, okay, maybe their child is not hearing. How do we communicate in a way that can help, reach the same end goal, which everyone to thrive, right? Instead of suffer.
Yes.
I think that's just a piece of it, and thinking about it like building like a psychological immune system, right? When we take vitamins, we take things to build, but we also need, how do you build up that psychological immune system? And, schools have only so much time to, give you personalized attention with social emotional learning, right? How do you take that to the next level? How do you get an A+ in coping and, resilience? And that is a way to actually more success. So you have to think about, for parents, how do you frame it so that it's not something like, oh, your child is effective, right?
Right.
As Dr. Nicole was saying.
Yes.
Well, I love this piece that you're saying, though, Dr. Lee, around like, hey, asking for help is a necessary skill that you need to instill in your child if you want the best for your child, right? Because that's really motivating, because I feel like at the end of the day, I would venture to say, like, most parents, if not all parents, want what is best for their kid. Right. And if you can make them see that, hey, your kid is not an island, and the more you help your kid build the tools and the muscles to seek out support and not think of it as like, oh my God, you need help, that's a bad thing, but oh no, it's an inevitable thing. So, let's just build that muscle as like one that you're going to have to use often.
How do you advocate for yourself, right? How do you be assertive? And sometimes in our culture, it's like, okay, don't speak up. Don't, you were saying earlier, kind of being quiet a bit. It is a skill we need, especially in, how things are going right now. We need to be able to learn to advocate for ourselves, whether it's standing up to a bully, whether it's standing up for kind of what you need, and being able to know how to seek. It's part of becoming an adult, right? Learning those skills.
Right. Yeah. And, I will say, like, the one thing I'm really grateful for with my upbringing with my family is that, like, that was something that when we were kids, they would, like, how, like, when you're like eating at the food court or something and they get your order wrong, or like whatever, like you need to go get something and you could talk to somebody about it. Right. Yeah. I was the kid, and then it was eventually my brother, and then eventually my sister, but like they would send the kids to actually say, okay, go have this interaction. And I hated it when it was happening as a child, right? Because I'm like, you're going to make me go talk to this person that already holds more power, that is bigger than me as an adult, maybe did something wrong. And now I have to give them feedback and say, oh no, we ordered this and you gave me this, or, I needed a fork and you gave me a spoon, whatever. And, you're forcing me to have this uncomfortable conversation. But it's not just my thing. It's like our thing. Why don't you do it? Right. And my parents were like, no, you're part of the family. They got our order wrong. You have to go say something. Right.
I love that.
So, and frankly, I hated it in the time, but I've now I feel like in a very safe way, they were like pushing me to start to build those muscles and say, hey, we can see you. We know where she is. We know who she's talking to. It's very safe for her to advocate like that. Yeah. So that relates really deeply. I agree with that fully.
Right. And I think so many parents these days, they kind of try to snowplow parent. How do we make them just happy, right? Like, how do I solve their problems for them? I'm sure a lot of people here experience that. And it's like, no, actually, you need to put them in uncomfortable situations so they know they can handle it, right? Because you're not going to be with them once they go to college. And like your parents did. Yeah. This is you getting practice over time, in how to speak up.
Right.
Thank
And
you.
we do a lot of work with Montessori schools and organizations. And this is the freedom within boundaries Montessori principle, which is the whole point is you have to help kids understand that there are still boundaries, that when you push against a boundary, there are consequences, that they are also allowed to have boundaries, that,
Yes.
like all of that, right? This is part of like the consent conversation. So yeah, it really resonates. For me, I think like one of the ways I think I have been trying to dismantle stigma on within my family, because I have my mom's a physician, my dad's a pharmacist, so I have like scientist parents, and neither one of them has ever seen a mental health professional. Right. And so, this is still a challenge. And, like my siblings and I are trying to do something different, and we're trying to, get the help we need. And I realized that I must just lead by example. That like me screaming blue, so I'm blue in the face and go to therapy, or, whatever, like get the help is not going to do it.
Yeah.
And frankly, I feel like it's a throwback to like when they were yelling at me when I was a kid, and I was like, this is so ineffective. I don't know why this is why, because I'm like, okay, I'm doing that to them now. And I'm like, go to therapy. And it's not going to work. So I think for me, I feel like the way I'm trying to dismantle stigma on like a small scale within my family and within like my like community here is to just talk about the amazing experiences I'm having, the mental health breakthroughs I'm having, how vibrantly I'm able to show up when we meet up. I guess like by just like living a full life that in a healthy way incorporates mental health, because your brain is an organ in your body and you can't pretend like it doesn't need anything. Right. And so by talking about it more freely, like in webinars like this and opportunities like this, and saying, yeah, like I see a therapist, I take antidepressants, like it's not a thing I'm afraid to talk about, and it's not a thing I want to pretend I need to hide in the shadows.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Before we continue, I want to thank Asia for dropping some wonderful resources in the chat. Thank you for doing that. And y'all jump in this conversation with us, even though you're our viewers. If you have some thoughts, and we're going to hold a little space at the end for some questions. Thank you so much, Asia. Rashi, I want to follow that a little bit. I think what we talked about, you're saying as an adult, I'm modeling, I'm showing by example, right? What I heard Dr. Lee say earlier was that some of our children are suffering in silence.
Yeah.
And so the question is, how do we begin to help younger folks or children begin to start having the conversation with their elders and parents about mental health and their mental health well-being? Where can they start?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I started these conversations with my family around my own mental health. And frankly, like what really drove me to seek mental health help in earnest was over COVID. I just randomly, like it was, me and my husband, we were grateful and privileged enough to like have a house over COVID that we could quarantine in. We were able to have jobs. So, life was good for the most part, right? Like we didn't have to worry about like a lot of the things that I think a lot of people had to worry about over COVID in terms of like food and shelter and just, keeping warm. And still I started having these panic attacks at night randomly. Right? No real reason, not like, oh, something is, bad is happening at work or something bad is happening here. But I just started having these panic attacks. And I, frankly, they scared me because I'd had a couple panic attacks before, but they were, almost always related either to like a physical injury or some sort of like very, immediate trauma. So you could ascribe them to the trauma and say, okay, this makes sense. Yes, we obviously need to still address the panic issue, but I understand why I'm having the panic attack. Whereas over COVID, I wasn't even sure why I was having these panic attacks. And so I was like, okay, if I can't even pinpoint why this is happening, I have no hope of being able to figure this out on my own to stop it from happening. And so I must seek help. And in that process, as I was seeking help, I was just talking to my family about it. And I was just telling them, I told my siblings first. It's actually what made my sister get and see a therapist, finally. And so as I was just like sharing vulnerably my journey, and it's been imperfect. Like I've struggled with being on meds, being off meds. I've struggled with different therapists. I've struggled with doing virtual therapy, in-person therapy, different forms of therapy. So, I mean, it's a journey, right? It's not like, oh, I have like the first therapist I saw is the perfect fit and everything is good and life is cozy. And it's very much, like kind of peaks and valleys. But I think what has been really helpful is that they're seeing that there's no harm. Like nothing bad has happened to me by seeing a therapist. Nothing bad has happened to me by getting on antidepressants, frankly. And if anything, I am better. So now when we actually meet up, right? Like they see how I show up more authentically, more whole, more me.
Yes.
And actually, and one of my neighbors, actually, who's older, she made a comment to me like a couple of weeks ago where she was like, oh, like you feel more you. And I was like, yeah, I was like, I feel more me. And it's because I'm also, doing the mental health help work and getting the support and not just pretending that part of my body I could just repress. Right. And so I think like in those moments, like that's the testament, right? That's the testimony. And I am I'm walking the talk and I am sharing it as I'm walking it. And that's really been the only way I've been able to, and I've been actually, I'll give my grandmother credit. Like I've been able to have some really honest conversations and like, and she would have been a textbook case for somebody that would have benefited from mental health help. Right? Like a badass woman that could have like really reached new heights if she had gotten the support from an early age. Like she was married at the age of like 15, had her first kid at the age of 16, right? Like talk about unpacking intergenerational trauma. And she still created a legacy with grandkids like me, who I feel proud. I feel proud of her and I feel proud of everything she's done. So, I mean, that if I had grandkids, that would be what I would hope for. That they feel proud of me and want to have me in their lives, even though they don't need to have me in their lives.
Got it. That makes sense. Okay. We've talked a lot about the stigma, what it means, how it's showing up in the community, particularly with our young folks. Let's move towards healing. How can educators support parents on this journey? How can educators help parents even get support? How do we break those barriers down? Especially since there's so much cultural stigma attached. What can we do?
Yeah, I think I really like how Rashi shared her journey and how it's not just all easy, right? And I think being able to just, again, going back to the psychoeducation, like what is therapy and how can it be supportive and how could it be an additional bonus to help really helping parents better understand that, parents who maybe have never gone. And to be able to see it, it's just like, you might not like the first dentist you see, but you don't stop going to the dentist because it's not a good fit, right?
Come
like
on.
still need to like have that checked out and to be okay with knowing that like you can interview a whole bunch and find one. Not everyone's going to click, right? There are therapists I've been to them like, I don't think this is a good fit. And it's okay. We're not offended as therapists. We want you to find the best fit and someone that you can connect and relate to. So I feel like, helping parents is really like offering, letting them know where there are resources, where can they find, some of the directories that I shared in the thing. There are directories you can look for specific languages or even Psychology Today to be able to find someone that maybe better understands your lived experience as well. I think it's also important to, to invite the parents into the conversation about thinking about even family therapy, if their child is open to that, that is something that can be really effective because it's a space for the child. Maybe they don't feel safe sharing what they need at home, but maybe if they can share it with a mediator in place to help, hey, what are dynamics within the home that are causing suffering or causing more pain, and how can that also be effective? I think that's a piece of it as well. And for educators in the classroom, I can't really emphasize enough just how important it is to put in the curriculum having Asian American history or literature being valued. I grew up, I went to a high school that was like 70% Asian, and I did not even learn about Japanese internment at all. I didn't learn about, anything. I didn't even learn about Chinese building railroads, and it's like all that was just invisible until I went to college. I'm like, oh, we were in history and we made an impact. It's like you have to see yourself in that to feel like you matter and that you're important, right? And that you belong here as well. So I think it kind of goes back to kind of in that classroom setting. There's so much in the world we can't control right now, but for the people that work with the youth and are in classrooms, do you have the opportunity to create discussions in the classroom about breaking down stereotypes, having conversations about what it means to really understand and hear each other's personal stories beyond just making assumptions about them? Or is there space to just see the humanity within each other? And I feel like that's so critical this time to really promote that, like, unity. My son's in middle school and you hear the things that kids say to each other. It's heartbreaking. But I feel like that's a space where that all impacts mental health, when there's awareness of, how do we communicate each other and how do we really listen to each other doing those fishbowl exercises? How can we not just, Dr. Evans, when we were talking before about not just you can dismiss ideas, but not dismiss people. I loved how you did that when, and really learning to do that is a part of learning to resolve conflict, right? And that's part of having healthy mental health. How do you resolve conflict in a way you can state your piece, but also still listen to others and have that conversation? A lot of us weren't taught that growing up. How do you just listen one-way conversations, or do you get to say, hey, this is how I feel and this is what I need? Being able to practice that, and to say, hey, this is how we have healthy dialogue and conversation.
So Dr. Lee, I'm going to ask one more question about specific strategies. And then I want to hear from both you and Rashi about, I want you to sort of freedom train. So
can I just say one thing?
Yes.
Well, just the one, I think also, Dr. Lee, in the prep you had said about, like, also potentially like helping, like connecting parents to like maybe other traditional healing practices, right? So also not thinking about like mental health support doesn't look the same for everybody. Like that's, there could be other, other cultural ways of, like, Tai Chi, storytelling, whatever, could be ways in which that folks could still be getting mental health support, even if it doesn't look like seeing a psychiatrist.
Exactly. Yeah. Because that might be the furthest thing for what people are open to, but maybe they're open to, like, locally, we have an Asian American senior citizen center, and they do kind of like things around food. They do kind of meditations, and they do the Tai Chi or Qigong. And there's things that feel traditional healing practices that, haven't historically been valued here. And I think that's a way in, right? To say, here, come to this. Oh, maybe learn about this new thing, right? So it opens that door. Thank you for bringing that up.
And that was my question. My question was, what are some some healing strategies, maybe that we're not used to, or even some that we have heard of, that will heal people? So, or that you've used maybe even in your practice, Dr. Lee, in helping with this. And then as you begin to think about that, I'm going to give you a minute to think that through. The last question before we open it up, we'll have a few minutes left for questions if folks have it. If y'all have questions, will you drop them in the chat for Dr. Lee, for Rashi? Please drop them there. They'll try to answer them for you. But after you give us a few more strategies that you used for healing, I'd like for both of you, if you can, maybe a 1-minute response to this question that is sort of, to me, a freedom dreaming question. And that question is this. Y'all ready? If, we were really able to put some time, attention, focus, what would a truly culturally responsive mental health system look like in the Asian American community? What would that look like? What would we see? What would it look like? So maybe that's I don't know. I'm just gonna leave it there.
Well, I don't know that I have a polished response, but I have thoughts. Like I have elements.
Yeah.
Like for me, I feel like I think a couple indicators for me of like health in the Asian American like community would be that if, like one of the forms of endearment a lot of times is like asking your kid if they ate, right? Like it would be amazing, or like, like, did you eat food or like whatever, right? Like it's a lot of food related stuff. I think like if we could normalize asking each other about our mental health, like we check in about food, like that would be an indicator of health. And I think like in terms of what it would look like, I think it would look different because again, like I think Asian Americans as a group are not a monolith. We have a lot of different like cultural backgrounds and heritage and language and a lot of different pieces. And so I feel like there isn't really like one mental health system that I feel like is going to address the full Asian American diaspora. But I do feel like if we can get to a place where conversation about it is that ubiquitous and normalized and like even parent-child, right? Or like grandchild, then I think we will have like, that is like my holy grail, right? Like that
I love it.
Amazing. And that, of course, is like an indicator then that you have other wraparound pieces that people have access to and that they can go to and all of that, which currently is, that doesn't exist either, right? Like paying for mental health is another thing and all of that. But I think that would be part of it for me.
I love that. Dr. Lee.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think what I would love to see, my dream would be, starting from when our kids are little. And I think, this extends beyond just the Asian American community, but like learning about feelings and emotions and having like a space. I think when I was teaching in grad school about Asian American kind of psychology and coping, just having that space or a group for kids to come together, it is that normalizing, that validating, to say like, hey, like your parents did that, my parents did that too, right? And that is part of the healing, to know that you're not alone, to know that, hey, other people understand what your suffering looks like. And I think that space, just saying like, here, this is where you can go. And this is how you can learn skill building. Let's not wait until, we're adults to seek help, right? Like how can we from a young age understand kind of our backgrounds, our strengths, and that, our histories are valuable. And that's what I would wish, on top of mental health being free, all that. It's a big question. And
no more suffering in silence. No more suffering in silence.
Yes.
We're all in this together. Well, thank you both. Are there any questions? I don't see any in the chat, but if there are any questions, our viewers, do you see any? No? Any questions, viewers? Drop them in the chat. Or your thank yous and gratitude for this conversation. This has been an amazing conversation. Dr. Lee, where can they find you? If someone wants to ask you more questions or wants to, get support around this, where can people reach you?
So my Instagram handle is Dr. Caroline Lee. That's one place you can go. I'm also on the Psychology Today directory as well. So you can also find me there as well.
Thank you. And Rashi, where can they find you?
You can find me at All Things Embracing Equity. You could also email me at rashi@embracingequity.org. But yeah, if you message us through Embracing Equity, you will inevitably get through to our very small team. So
Yes.
just Embracing Equity for Instagram, Facebook, and I don't know where else we are.
Yes.
LinkedIn. Yes, everywhere. Everywhere that social media is.
Yes. And we will definitely drop the coaching link. You know, we do offer a free 30-minute coaching session for folks if you want to, and also a strategy session. We'll drop those links so that we can stay connected with y'all. Thank you so much. Dr. Lee has thanked everybody for coming. We thank everybody for coming. Keep coming. Real talk, real action, so that we can turn this information and make the world better for our children, our families, and our educators as well, and anyone who wants to center equity in their organizations. So thank y'all so much for being here, and we will see you next time. We'll be uploading more webinars to come. So in the next week, you'll see a few more pop up. We want to see you, and spread the word, y'all.
Thank you,
We'll see you
Dr.
later.
Evans, for
Thanks, y'all.
hosting.
Thank you. Bye,
Thank
y'all.
you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. We've got some nice comments there. Yay. Thank you. Thanks, folks. Thank you.